Yeah, straight Tom will do, thanks. Look, can I also begin by recognising the Aranda people on whose land we're meeting and pay respects to elders and, as I mentioned last night, particularly to youth and their youth from everybody, and recognise, that we're all here from different backgrounds and from different parts, not only of Australia but also internationally. My role this morning is really just to paint a bit of a picture about what we're going to be in for the next 2 days, which is fantastic. And I've got to say, it was just tremendous to see, to stand up here and see how many people are here, and dedicated, and how many were here by 8:30 this morning, which was absolutely, inspiring for all of us. We're, as Nigel said, and I should acknowledge too that Minister Scullion, Minister Nash and Minister Lee, the three ministers we report to, have in many ways been very supportive of us, but in other ways we're still, dragging the chain. They're dragging the chain a little bit, and and we'll come across and touch on that a bit later in what I say and what I mean by that. We've had many sponsors for this event, and they're very much appreciated. They're up on the board. There's a couple I wanted to just mention by way of who's here, and we've got commissioners from the National Mental Health Commission. We've got representatives and the CEO from Suicide Prevention Australia, who have been a strong supporter, and also SPA, as we call it, have got a conference in July, I think it is July 2, yep, and that's going to be having a dedicated focus on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicide, and so that's another one that'll build on this, and we've sequenced these, and we've had a very good working relationship with SPA. And if you have a look at the back of the program, you'll see the advisory committee that's been working on the conference, and you'll see their membership on there as some of the other major parties. The Healing Foundation, our foundation, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Healing Foundation, and Richard Weston, we'll hear from Richard in the next session, and his team have done a fantastic job and continue to do that sort of work. The University of Western Australia, where Pat works, and Jill Milroy, who sends her apologies, couldn't be here because of personal circumstance that was a late manifestation, and also the Telethon Kids Institute, and Glenn Pearson's here with a team of people. And we also have government representatives from Prime Minister and Cabinet who have been our primary funder. Surprisingly, it's coming out of Prime Minister and Cabinet and not out of Department of Health, although we will continually push Department of Health, and in fact our responsibility will probably move from PM&C for suicide prevention, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicide prevention, back to Department of Health. Although there is a good working relationship, it's very difficult when you're working to three ministers and across two portfolios, and if you start to take in social emotional wellbeing, which we also work on, it makes it very difficult, because you then bring in Department of Social Services, and what we're trying to do continually is to get governments to realise that they can't continually silo or just treat in isolation these programs. We've got to work across portfolios a lot more, look at our efforts through what we call a social determinants lens, to make sure that everything that has an impact is taken into consideration, and from a bureaucratic level they work together, because excuse me, most of the failings in Indigenous affairs in Australia can be shot home directly to governments and politicians for their lack of consistent policy direction, funding direction, and wanting to impose solutions on us. And that's why we want to make this conference a bit different, so that we can get the solid support base to be able to take that information back to the government. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. But I also wanted to acknowledge that we have a very senior delegation of politicians from West Australia here, and that that team, they're here, and I think we've got three, and Josie and Murray are down there who I've met from the team. It's a parliamentary education and health committee that they've established in West Australia to look particularly at Aboriginal youth suicide in West Australia. And so it's great that you could come along, Josie and team, and I want to personally acknowledge, as many of us in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs have acknowledged, the great work that Josie's doing in raising awareness in the West Australian Parliament, because we need champions, we need political champions to raise these issues, because if we don't have the champions there, they don't get talked about. And it's people like Josie who I think we need to recognise and support in that journey. So thank you, Josie. So, the conference, and just from a national scene, I thought I'd just present. There's two what we'd call, in some ways, bipartisan agreements in Indigenous affairs. One is, and importantly, the National Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Health Plan, which was developed under Labor and adopted by the current government, which is a Conservative government, and led by Fiona Nash from the government side, but really led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through the National Health Leadership Forum. We've now developed an implementation plan. So it's gone across two major political parties, and so it's bipartisan, and hopefully we can see that a bit more. That implementation plan is currently being considered and funding identified to be able to implement the plan, because plans are fantastic, but if there's no money to implement them, if there's no will to implement them, they sit on the shelf. Like many coroner's reports on suicide, and we've got some fantastic findings in coroner's reports over the years in a number of states that have given guidance, but they sit on the shelf. We've got Senate and House of Representative reports on a whole range of issues, from justice reinvestment to suicide prevention, that sit on the shelf and don't get moving. And so what we need to do is to make sure that we keep the pressure up, and that's why it's so important that so many people are here, because it's us in the community who are going to put the pressure on the politicians to make a difference. And if there's no pressure, then it's not an issue, unless you've got the Josie Farahs around who want to push it as an issue through Parliament. But as an individual, you don't get very far. So it's really important that we as a group stick together and have common messaging up to politicians, both at the state and the federal level, at the local level, to make sure these issues are there. People like Nigel Scullion can do so much, but if he doesn't have the support of his cabinet colleagues, then you're not going to get the change that we need to see. And that's why it's so important, and I'll mention why we need to get behind groups like the National Congress of Australia's First People, our representative body, who are elected body, and from all over the nation. And that's the political voice that we've got to put pressure on the government through that voice. Even though the government doesn't fund us anymore, there will be a day when they'll realise that the errors are their way by not funding the National Congress as the voice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So if you're not a member, think about becoming a member whilst we've got a bit of money left before we run out of money, because we might be a defunct body too in the near future. But at the international level, that's where the Congress really comes on its own. And last year at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, we raised suicide, Indigenous suicide as a major issue. The year before it was also raised, and so it's being discussed at the international level as well as the domestic level, and so it's all this different pressures that we need to put on. The second and only other bipartisan agreement in Indigenous affairs is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Suicide Prevention Strategy. Now that was developed up in 2013, May 2013 it was launched, and $17.8 million was allocated to that strategy. That same year we had a change of government, and so the strategy wasn't progressed. It sat. The money was quarantined. It didn't go out to the people. who needed it. There's every intention, as I understand it, that from this new financial year, the 17.8 million plus a little bit more will go out to PHNs, the primary health networks, who will then distribute it out to organisations for these programs, which is a bit of a concern on how they're going to do it and the support that they need to be able to deliver it properly. And so we've still got some big challenges, but it's a matter of how much pressure we can put on the government to help put them through. But in saying that, and as Minister Scullion said, 2 major projects were funded: the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Suicide Prevention Evaluation Project, which is nearly concluded and we'll be reporting up to government shortly, as well as the Critical Response Unit or program that's being trialled in WA. But it's already now extending, and I won't go into detail on that because Pat will cover off on that in the next session. But the other bipartisan group that we've got is one that Pat and I co-chair, and that's the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Advisory Group, which is an advisor to the 3 ministers. And so we have a representation from around the nation on our committee. It's a ministerial committee, and so we continually raise these issues. But, you know, it's a sort of commitment. We went for 4 months this year not knowing, because the program ceased at the end of last year, and then it took until mid-April, before the ministers decided that we'd still go for another 9 months. And it's this inconsistency in policy application that really does hamper our development as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So, what about today and tomorrow? The program says it all, and I think it's a fantastic program, and I wanted to acknowledge the team that pulled this together and got everybody here. What we've tried to do is to make sure that it's an opportunity for everybody to have a voice at the conference. It's also an opportunity where we won't have talk fests, although here's me up there talking like a champion, but anyhow. We've only got 2 keynote speakers. We'll hear one the next session and one tomorrow, and we did that intentionally because these are very high quality speakers who can talk about things from a grassroots to a national level, and I think you'll find both of them very inspiring. We've created the conference to have an opportunity for everybody to have a say, both in the formal setting but also in a less formal setting. At the end of the day, into tomorrow, we want to walk away from here knowing that you've had the opportunity to tell us what you think are some of the not necessarily solutions, but some of the ways forward that we can use to lobby governments. And whilst our mandate is for the federal government, it's also we extend our advice to state and territory and whoever else wants to listen to us. But and some of the responses are needed even at the local level, the local government level. So what we say here is not just about what can influence the federal government, but all levels of government across the nation. So there'll be pieces of butcher paper around on the walls, and Adele will touch on this a bit later, but make sure you use those if you've got ideas. Use the yarning the yarning circles, and each day we've got yarning circles. Each session we've got them dotted throughout, where you can go in and have a say and get support from people and just express your view. So it's important that your view is expressed here. Because we have these concurrent sessions, which is always a real bummer at conferences, because you want to be at 2 or 3 of them at the same time and you can't do it. So you have to choose which one you do. But we looked at things like community-based solutions, which is important. Cultural solutions, looking at the cultural practices that go on, and how important are they? Because for us, they became very important when we looked at the conference, because not a lot of the work, but we've been influenced by what's happening in Canada and what's happened in Canada in the past. And a guy called Michael Chandler has driven that. You might have met with Michael when he's visited us in Australia a few times, but he talks about the work that he does with Native Canadians, and we've, through our suicide prevention strategy, tried to take some of their lessons and seeing if those lessons would apply over here. But cultural continuity is one of the really important ones, and communities who are able to still express their language, have control over their lives, are able to be self-governing, self-determining, have much better or much less incidence of people taking their own life than those that are disempowered. And so part of the evaluation project that Pat will talk about covers off on that. So culture for us is critically important in where we go. We looked at, and I mentioned some of the vulnerable groups yesterday, but people like, and there's many here who are members of the stolen generation or have family members who have been in the stolen generations, and that group is also very much affected, and so we need to look at those. Our prisons, we know that our people who go to prison have a shorter life expectancy on release, particularly long-termers, and also a higher incidence of taking their own life than other members of the community. But it's about, again, sharing knowledges and sharing experiences, but doing that in a respectful way, so that we all get the opportunity to have a say, we all get the opportunity to be able to share our thoughts and ideas, but we're also here to learn from others and take that as I guess a given as we go through the day. So I hope that will give you an idea about what we're on about. Some of the key things that we thought might be really important, and this is in tomorrow afternoon's session in looking at what we should take up as policy directions, but one of the ones is a real standout is we need to have an implementation plan for all the work we've got through the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicide prevention strategy and the work in mental health and so forth. And we've had some good discussions with the ministers involved in the way forward and what our advisory group will tell them. But we want as an advisory group to be informed by you, and you'll hear about how we've gone about that when Pat comes up in the next session. But thank you. Enjoy the conference, and I hope you get out as much as you're able to put in. Thank you.